Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Dev, where today we continue working on our little 2.5D racer. Now, last time we started work on creating the illusion of an infinitely scrolling level, which was done via multiple vertex planes and matrices. The endeavor was almost a complete success outside of a few gaps forming between planes, but the mathematical mystery of said gaps were temporarily solved with a band-aid solution. This allowed us to move on to our first obstacle and the impending fail state it would lead to if the player crashed into it. Overall, a solid start, which we continue to build on with today's plan. We'll be playing with the Z-axis through the addition of a ramp obstacle. We'll also add another danger in the form of a projectile, which the player will be able to block with the use of a temporary shield. And finally, we'll add a collectible object the player can obtain along their racing journey. Sounds like a plan, so let's get to the coding. First up was the ramp, which needed a sprite. With that done, it was on to the player code where a collision check was made for our new ramp object. And on said collision, a sequence would start, altering the player's Z position to toss them in the air. And after so many frames, the direction would switch to bring the player back down. This ended up almost working, with the player being able to hit the ramps and take to the air. However, the sequence could be triggered more than once, resulting in the player never truly returning to their default Z position. Also, this is the current change in scenery I'm testing for this episode. Apparently, we've gone from space to the Nether from Minecraft. Anyway, back to the code. The ramp collision was simplified to push the player up on contact and pull the player back down when not. The Z position was then clamped to prevent the player from falling through the floor. And the results of these changes were far more consistent. The player was now able to gain altitude while on the ramps and fall back down to the surface when off. However, though this is what was expected, I may turn this ramp into a 3D model down the line, because the 2D sprite just feels, off. Anyway, with this working, the player's move speed was then slowed down when in the air. Not sure if it was necessary, but this would at least prevent the player from darting around while airborne. So with that working, it was now on to the new projectile and block mechanic, which required their own respective sprites, some type of energy shield, and a green ball of potential doom. A block boolean was added to the player, and a spacebar check would set the block to true. This would then be reflected in drawing of the shield sprite. Next, because all our obstacles are currently stored in the same sprite and object, a switch was added to the player's collision check for obstacles. Then the fail state was wrapped up in a nice little function. And finally, in the case for the green projectiles, a block check was made. If the player is blocking, the obstacle would be destroyed, else the fail state would trigger, just like when the player crashes into rocks. And though a little janky visually, this ended up working just as we needed. Collisions were on point, the block check was working, and the player could still fail if not on the defensive. So now it was time to make things a little less janky and a bit more challenging. Back in the code, new variables were added to the obstacle object. These would allow for added movement on top of consistently moving to the left. For example, instead of destroying them, blocked projectiles would be sent flying upwards into the stratosphere. And once confirmed to be working, the other dimensions were also altered. And finally, just so the player couldn't block forever, a block meter was added. Once the meter is depleted, the player must wait for it to recharge before they're able to block again. The tests were indeed successful, with the player being able to knock projectiles, and only projectiles, out of their way so long as they are blocking, which only lasts for about 2 seconds before needing another 2 seconds or so to recharge completely. Pretty rudimentary for now, but solid enough for us to move on to our final addition for the session, the collectible. Originally, the sprite for this was a gold coin, but yellow and orange is hard to see, so water coin is what we're collecting. Anyway, this was also added to our obstacles, so thus another case was added to the player's collision check. And instead of ending the game on contact like the other obstacles, this would destroy the coin object and add a point to the player's coin count variable. Once again, very simple, but it worked just as we needed, allowing the player to accumulate said coins on their journey through this hot and wild world of rocks, ramps, green balls of doom, and water coins. Indeed, I have no idea where we're going with this thematically, but boy has it been a lot of fun. While majority of the coding this session revolved around the collision code, I like that we've managed to utilize the same object in 3 unique ways. So, confusing mess of visual ideas aside, I'm excited to see what else I can add to this thing, as well as potentially add some 3D models. But as always, we'll have to save that for another time, because this brings us to the end of today's episode of Let's Dev. So leave a like if you enjoyed the episode, subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't already, and leave your thoughts on our progress in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.